Hi, Michelle. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me return. I love talking with you, as you well know.
Yes, you know what, Michelle? You are just so fun. And we got to meet in person. Gosh, I'm thinking that was 2 or 3 years ago in Texas. I went to see my sister when she lived there, and we got to meet up. And we had just recorded with you and Lynn for your girls' devotional, Loved and Cherished. And I love that you and Lynn have partnered together again to come up with a phenomenal devotional. Now, this is a book that I wish I had when I was young. It's called Managing Your Emojis, which, first of all, the title is brilliant. It's all about managing your emotions, but kids these days use emojis. And so I love that you are entering into their world. But I want to ask you a question. For me, growing up, I did not grow up with a lot of emotional literacy. We did not talk about our emotions in our home. There wasn't a way to learn how to manage them. And so this is something I sadly learned years later as I walked through my heartbreaking divorce. So tell me what it was like for you growing up. Was this something that you had in your home? I know you're a counselor for 25 years. I'd love to hear a little of your backstory.
Well, actually, I think I felt all the emojis and I definitely tried to manage them, but I did not grow up in a home where I felt like that my parents were okay with me feeling especially the difficult emojis. In fact, when I
Mm.
told my mom the book that just came out with Tama Fortner and I called God, I Feel Sad, when I told her I was getting this idea I was pitching, she's like, why wouldn't you write about God, I feel joy and God, I feel peace? And I'm like, Mom, this is exactly why I'm writing this book because so many parents are not comfortable sitting with their kids when they have difficult emotions. And she's like, I guess that was your childhood, huh? And I was like, a little bit, yeah, it was. And for me, and I think a lot of kids would relate to this, and I think a lot of you may relate to this who are listening. My cat knew a lot about my emotions. I grew up with a cat and pet therapy. You know, I have a pet therapy dog. I'm a huge fan of that. And then for me, I was very fortunate that I knew God at an early age. I remember crying out to God very young or being mad and being comfortable talking to God about my mad. But I feel like so many kids and adults feel like if I have these negative feelings, I'm not following scripture right. So I need to
Mm.
hide these from God, even though we really can't hide anything from God. Like I think we feel the need for that. And so that just concerns me so much that kids know that God can handle their emotions for sure, but also I really have a passion to equip parents to even, like you said, you got things from this book, to read this book alongside their kids and figure out how they can manage their emotions better and be practical about it, because the scripture says like fear not, but how do you do it, right? Like that's the counseling side of things. Is we know these are the tools, but what does it look like to use them every day?
So good. Yeah, you know what? I think it's so great that the parents and the kids read this book together because for me, it was like I was just a step ahead of my kids in my counseling. They were in counseling. We were walking through this divorce for our family, and it's like we grew together, emotional literacy. And so I feel like this book is going to be that tool where a parent and a child can read it together. And if a parent doesn't have this, like we can't teach what we don't know, so they can kind of learn it as they go with the kids. And so I love that it's for both, but I love that it gives voice to kids because I grew up in our home. And again, the negative emotions, it was like, get that joy, joy, joy back in your heart. It's like, I don't feel joyful right now. I'm mad. And how do you deal with that? I was never taught. Sadly, I would just blame. And I never owned my own emotions and learned how to be responsible for them. And so I love that there's a tool out there now. Your book is so great and it releases in June and I cannot wait. And you guys, we're going to dive deeper into it. So let's start with this. At the very beginning, you talk about emotions are energy in motion. And I love this. You say you sense this energy moving through your mind, your heart, and your body, and you encourage us with God's help that this can be managed. Tell me about this energy in motion.
So I think this goes back to our counseling center's approach to treatment, even that we use a bio, psycho, spiritual, social model, which means we don't look at anything from just one viewpoint. And that's where the church has struggled. Like, I love scripture and I love the application of scripture in our lives, but emotions affect our body. So to not work on things like breathing, to not work on
Mm.
walking out our mad, or, I've had kids before who were really struggling with anger, and I told their mom, get a paintbrush and a bucket of water and let them go out on the fence and just slap the water as hard as they can on the fence, because the emotions get released. And we know this, and there's a neurochemical component to this, which I don't want to go too geeky on us all, but there's dopamine and there's serotonin, and there's so many different neurochemicals, the adrenaline, that are part of this too. And so all this is being released in our body. And then there's a couple of possibilities. Either it's going to be released in a healthy way, or a lot of kids and a lot of us try to I've seen people try to swallow their tears, almost hold their breath to hold in their mad. And then it can get stuck in our bodies, and that can lead to depression. It can lead to a level of anxiety that will cause panic disorder and things like that. Sorry, I can't help do the mental health piece of this as well.
No, I love that.
That's one of the reasons I wrote this book, is, to me, how we manage our emotions is either going to prevent or decrease the level of mental health struggles we experience, or it's going to make it worse because it's like ignoring the light on your car that's coming on. Emotions let you know that something is going on in your life and your body. And if you ignore the light long enough, the car is going to break down. And if you ignore these emotions, if you don't deal with this energy and motion, then we as people can break down as well. And we can anyway. This book was not written to be if you do this, they won't struggle. It was never intended, because guess what? I know all of this, and you and I talked a little bit about my last 6 months of my own life. I'm struggling, and I know everything to do. It's just sometimes even hard. I just listened to a book called On Getting Out of Bed. And there are days, I know probably when you went through your divorce, it was just hard to get out of bed. And you did it because of community. You did it for your kids. You did it for yourself. And our kids are struggling like that. They don't want to go to school. They don't want to go to things. They don't want to do things that they used to want to do. And so I think we have to meet them where they're at and validate that this is hard. This energy in your body, you don't have control over, and it's hard. And then I think we add but I'm here to help. But let's do 3 things and fix it. I don't think that's it always.
No.
I'm here for you. I want to walk with you through the hard. I know even for a parent to say, I know what the hard feels like. And God knows what it feels like too. And He's here with us, and He's going to help us.
That's so good. You know what? It makes me think of empathy, because so many times as parents, we want to fix something, but sometimes our kids just want us to understand and enter into it with them. So how are you feeling from something at school? Just tell me more about that, entering into it and just listening. Now, eventually we get to the part of helping and fixing, but that's not first, and I love that you said, I want to be here for you in the middle of this. I'm here for you. That's very empathetic. That's very much like, let me enter into it with you, versus like, hey, just go do your breathing. It's like, yeah, that's important, but let me say it's hard. Like, what you're going through is hard. And I know you've had a really hard year with the loss of your dad. And again, you know what to do, but it doesn't mean it's still not hard. And so I love that you said that this book is not a, hey, one and done, you do this and you're never going to have hard emotions again, but it's learning how to manage those hard emotions so that they don't come out in ways that are unhealthy, like exploding or stuffing. And so I thought it was so great. I was a fellow exploder for many years. And listen, I can still get into explode mode really easily with my anger, but I've learned how to really rein it in. And again, it was walking through these things and learning these tools. And you have so many practical tools in your book, which is what I love about it. And so let me go over the 4 ways you divided up the book. I think it's really great. You said there's 4 sections. So sad, and then you talk about embracing hope, scared, embracing brave, mad, embracing calm, and happy, embracing joy. Now, I'd like to focus in on sad and mad, because for me, those have been one of some of my biggest struggles, especially the anger one. Oh, I mean, I was never, no one ever showed me any ways to deal with my anger, and it was just coming out. I was disappointed in many things. It was coming out all sorts of ways. So, but I think sad is a big one these days in our kids. There's so much in life that's going through and it's just, sometimes there's disappointments and they can go sad or mad. So I want to dive into those first. And so I'm curious, did you have a favorite devotional on sad that you did or that you wrote that you would like to share first?
I thought about this, and I'd rather just highlight some of the ones that you talked about. I think the main
Perfect.
thing that I've thought about was sad as I've continued to walk post writing this. So I'll give your listeners a little extra here. Is that, especially as I walk through God, I feel sad, is that these waves will come and they will go. And sometimes they will be large and they will feel big. And sometimes you'll be able to say, this is what caused it. But
Mm.
sometimes you're going to wake up and have a day, especially when you're in a place like me where you've walked through major surgeries and grief and some, financial changes in my business, and then a recent hospitalization. When you have all of that, like, just life stress coming at you strong, um, it'll be a small thing. And that's what I want to help parents realize. Like, sometimes I know that one day the car broke down in the midst of all this. Well, I wasn't that sad about a car breaking down. I've handled car breakdowns. I'm 50 for a long time. But that was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back.
Mm.
And what I think is so important is we don't want our kids to walk around miserable, but I would say this too. Before you even, especially because this book is really for parents of late elementary, teenagers, early teenagers, before you even say, I love asking my kids instead of, well, here's what I think you should do, because I think that's often a parenting response.
Hmm.
Instead, I think maybe, what would you like to do to help yourself with this? That's
Mm.
what we like to do in the counseling office because it's so empowering to begin to coach your kids. And I see Jesus do this over and over again, as he talks to the woman at the well, as he talks to the people who are ready to stone a woman, all these different stories. And he asks a very poignant question. And so sometimes it's even like, how long do you want? I remember asking one kid who'd just been sad a long time.
Mm.
I asked him, do you want to take a break from your sad? And they were like, can I take a break? I mean, my mom's got cancer. Can I take a break from sad? And I'm like, I think it'd be
Wow.
okay. What do you think? Yeah, I think it'd be okay. And I know that as my sister-in-law and her husband both died of cancer with 3 kids under 10. And we took a break sometimes from just grief. Even we went to Six Flags and I told him, okay, this is Six Flags Day. We're not worrying about anything. We're just going to have a good time. We are just leaving everything back at the house. And it
Mm.
was so good. So I think part of this is to say that more than one emotion can sit beside the others at the same time. And it's also okay to, like, we call it containment, to contain an emotion for a little while. I think I talk a little bit about that with the worry box, but it'll work for sad or mad or anything else. And then pull it back out. Don't ignore it, but you think about it. I mean, I'm dealing with grief, but I still have to work sometimes. And so I can't just grieve all the time, nor would I want to. But then there's a time and a place for that. And I think we have to help our kids understand that too. And
Mm.
unfortunately, as our kids get older and we quit doing bedtime tuck ins, a lot of that comes in the quiet, still, them being in their bedrooms. And that's where I tell parents, not always by themselves, check in on your kids. How'd you sleep last night? When's the last time you cried? Things like that. And then when they're mad, not to say, it's in your anger, don't sin. God knows we're going to be mad. He knows it. And I think as a parent, like, my biggest struggle was, and we kind of jumped here, sorry. um,
No, I'm loving
they were
everything you're
mad at,
sharing.
when they were mad at me. Like, I
Mm.
I grew up in a home where that was disrespectful. That had to stop. And we can offend our kids, or our kids can have an expectation that we don't meet, and they're frustrated and they're irritated. Or sometimes, I mean, I'm dealing with a 12 and a 15-year-old. I'm in the middle of tweenagedom. Sometimes they just wake up with hormones, and so do I. My husband's like, whoever thought of puberty and menopause at the same time as well. And so I
Oh, so
we
good.
need to just understand that this exists and acknowledge it in our families and be okay with it.
Mm. I love everything you just shared. Oh my goodness, Michelle. So much goodness I want to pull out. The containment box. I love that we at times sometimes just need to put it in the box and say, I'm going to have a day where I'm not going to focus on that, and then bring it back out, though. We can't leave it there forever. I love that. You said, because that's ignoring it and trying to numb it or stuff it, and that's not going to help. But I love that you said there was a day you guys did that where you just needed to say, we're going to leave it at home and we're going to go. And I love that you talked about facing those feelings even when they're hard. Oh, so much goodness. But you talked about tears, and I want to get back to this because I think in our culture, for some reason, we are embarrassed to cry in public. We are embarrassed to cry in front of people. And you said in your counseling, the kids will say, apologize when they start to break down and cry in your office. And I think I even did that too when I would start crying in my counseling years ago. And why, I don't understand why that we're ashamed of that. So let's focus on that a little bit. But tell me the importance of tears. You said there's some really important things that happen when we cry that are good for us and that we really shouldn't be ashamed. So I'd love to just do a quick little talk. And it's in the devotional called Letting Go of the Pain.
So there is a neurochemical release that happens when we cry, and it brings about good neurochemicals into our bodies and floods our bodies with those. And so that is very important that we allow that sometimes to happen. I think, I laughed because you brought this up, and I was just at a luncheon recently with a group of women in ministry and ministry leaders. And one of them kind of said to me, gosh, this has been a tough season for you. And she laid out everything that had happened to me recently. And then kind of ended with, and I'm so sorry about your dad. And this was probably like a month after we'd been to the funeral. And I just started crying. I mean, I'm at this beautiful luncheon with people I haven't seen in a year, probably, at least some of them longer than that. And I'm crying. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And they laughed and they're like, hey, you just wrote a book called God, I Feel Sad. It's fine to be sad, And I think part of it is that our culture is hard. And so when we're at something that's joyful, we want to be joyful too. And that's hard. Sometimes I think we avoid joyful events when we're struggling because we don't want to go because we can't be joyful. I think sometimes we get there and we're trying. I mean, I went to a wedding and I'm just trying to be joyful, right? I want to have a good time. I want to be excited. And what's the hardest is when we don't feel that joy. I remember talking to you when I released Loved and Cherished, and oh my gosh, the high I was on from that, just the experience, the emotional joy I felt. When I released God, I Feel Sad, it came out 4 days after my dad's funeral. I cried on the same day I released a book, and it was so discouraging in a way not to have just the good feelings. And I think those are just hard moments. And it's hard when you're at a party and tears come. It's still good. I think it's okay that we say, I'm sorry, because you want to be respectful of the fact that this is supposed to be fun and I'm not in a fun place. But that's the most amazing thing, I think, is what I'm trying to help parents be is safe for their kids. Those women were so safe for me in that moment to say, one of them owned it. I brought it up. I'm the one who laid it all on the table. I started this, And the other women were like, we've all been there. We've all had the hard year. And we just want to be beside you in the middle of that and be this safe space. And I go back to I heard a woman speaker talk about when the mom elephant is struggling, the other women surround her.
Wow.
And I think about that idea of that's what I want to do for my kids. I don't want to rescue them. But I think we've almost gotten scared because we don't want to be helicopter parents as service come, that I don't think we rescue our kids, but I think it's important that they know, like my daughter went through a breakup recently, that we're there beside them through those experiences, that we're safe to talk to, and that we're not going to share. And this is where, I'm a counselor, but I can be bad as a mom mouth. We're not going to share those intimate, vulnerable moments with other people. We're going to protect them.
I love that elephant analogy, that community coming around and like those women wrapped around you and say, we have had a hard year too. We're here for you today. And I think when you were talking about the two emotions together, I just kept picturing that ampersand, that letter, that and symbol. And again, it's been in a couple different books I've read, but you can have joy and sorrow at the same time. And it doesn't dismiss either one. They can both exist. And it just brings a story to my mind where it was a day on my podcast back a couple years ago. It was like the most exciting day. I was interviewing one of my favorite authors I hadn't had a chance to interview before. It was this most joyous day. And at the same time, we found out our dog had cancer. And that same day, we had to put him down. And it was like, God, why are they both falling on the same day? Like, why couldn't you have made one, but I just had this visual of sometimes we have both at the same time. And that's okay. Like teaching our kids that it's okay to feel both of those emotions, whatever you're walking through. It doesn't mean you have to only feel sorrow or only feel joy. And so I just like how you said enter into it with them. And I just think tears sometimes they need to flow out of us. Like you said, the emotion has to move through us and maybe not always apologizing, especially if you're in a place like a counseling center or something where it's okay. Like that's where you're supposed to let it out. But I was just thinking of that ampersand and just again inviting our kids to know it's okay. Whatever emotions you're feeling, God gave us these emotions. He understands them. Jesus wept, but then he also had times when he was joyous. And so, anyways, it just made me think of that ampersand symbol. Um, but I love that you have another devotional called God Will Never Abandon You, because I think there is a fear in kids that something might happen to their parents. And I have sadly a friend who passed away. And I know that that was one of her biggest fears when she was sadly knowing she was going to die is, what's going to happen to my kids? And I just know that that could be a fear for a kid. And you had said that you guys had watched a movie and your son had seen this, the boy had lost his dad and he was just having a little bit of this fear. And so you did something really tangible for him to remember that God will never leave you nor forsake you, which is one of my favorite verses in the Bible when I'm feeling alone and just even being alone as a single mom. Just God is with me. I'm not doing this alone. And it was this really tangible thing you gave him to put in his pocket. Will you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think I really want to kind of encourage parents to think about this. How could you maybe give your child something, whether it's a piece of jewelry that reminds them that God is always with them, whether they put a rock in their pocket and it
Mm.
reminds them that God is always with them. In the office, I have these heart-shaped rocks and a lot of times I will encourage a kid to walk around that day and touch the rock in their pocket so that they'll be reminded that God's with them when they're in the hallway and taking a test and with a friend or on the playground, maybe when no one's talking to you or in the lunchroom. I think that's the thing we want is to be practical with that in that sense. What are some ideas like that you think are ways that we can remember that God is with us and remind ourselves of that? And how do we do that for our kids? And I think sometimes in a culture where it's easy to slap a plastic scripture up on the wall, with a thing or have a screenshot or something, um, that we take that for granted and we don't utilize that as much as we could. But I don't want to just take that for granted. I want us to remember that we are never alone, even when we
Mm.
feel lonely. And that doesn't mean we always experience God's presence. And this was really important to me to write because when I went through a really difficult time in my own life, when I was on a church and on staff, and I was offered an opportunity to either betray my boss or be fired. And it was a really difficult
Wow.
place. And I chose, I lost everything. I lost my job. I lost my community. I lost everything in just a moment's time. And I called one of my mentors and pastors and I said to him, I can't see anything. I just can't. And he's like, this is what depression feels like. This is what it feels like. When you experience depression, it is hard to experience the presence of God in those moments always. They're fleet. I'm not saying it never comes, but it's not this, like a lot of times we feel like those of us who are intuitive and we experience God's presence. Sometimes it's harder in that moment. Sometimes we do feel it very strongly. I know I was just literally beside myself in an ER and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me last month. And I literally had this sense of like wings with feathers covering me and
Mm.
me being underneath them. And I just thought, it's going to be okay. And then the doctor walked in and said, this is what's wrong and da 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 da. But I already had that peace because it was almost like supernaturally, spiritually, I had this experience of that. But that doesn't happen all the time to everybody. And it hasn't happened in every moment of my life when I would have wanted it to. And so I think it's important that we talk about that to our kids, that sometimes we're going to sense God's presence and sometimes we're going to have to walk in faith that it's there and
Mm.
that he's there with us even when we don't sense him. And the harder our struggle is, the less likely I think sometimes we will experience him continuously, because I think when our emotions shut down, I think alongside that, sometimes our sense of spirituality can shut down kind of beside it.
I love that you said that it's good that we show them both, because I know for me, walking through the divorce, I actually felt God's presence more in my life that next year than ever before. Now, I was also searching for it. I was reading my Bible. I was diving deep because I just felt like I needed truth, God's promises. I was reading book after book. And so there was definitely that truth being put into me. But I think that it's important to tell our kids and show them God's promises and say, this doesn't change on a day that's good that you're having versus a day that's bad. These promises are true, and so that they can have that to cling. And so I love that idea. You gave them that rock of like, this is God with you always. And obviously, it's just a metaphor, but like to remind them, like on the hard days, on the good days, if I'm here, if I'm not here, just I love that. And the presence of God, I definitely think there are times where we don't always feel it, like you said, and there's times we do, but just reminding them that these truths in the Bible, these promises are true, whether you feel them or not. Like, and I think that's the hardest part is, can we trust God even when we can't feel it? And can we trust him when we don't understand? And so I've talked to my kids and I've said, it doesn't say in the Bible if you go through hard things. It says when you walk through these hard things. And so we've talked about that, about these were my hard things I walked through. My friend passing away just was so hard. And I still don't always understand the why, but I have to trust that God is in control even when I don't understand. And so it's kind of showing them that. I think a lot of it, if they can see you live it out, that also makes a big impact. But I love that verse. I remember in college feeling really down. I had really bad acne and I just felt like alone. And that verse, God will never leave you nor forsake you, I read a little devotional that had it in it. And so it became this powerful verse for me. It was one I clinged to very much through my divorce. And so I love that tangible way of showing your child that God will never abandon you. So good. Well, because of time, we're going to run. Because of time, we're going to switch over to the angry. And again, this one is like so many things. I'm like, I wish I had all these tools back when I was 10 and I was 11 and 12. And again, I didn't learn these things till late 30s. I mean, it's just mind boggling how I even made it through some of these things with not knowing how to manage my emotions, especially anger. But you talk about in the slow to become angry, you say changing angry ways involves turning away from habits people have, blaming others for their anger. You have to own your own emotion because each person can only change themselves. And I think this was this big light bulb moment for me when I learned that my response is my responsibility. I think a lot of times kids, especially our own kids, they know our like little triggers, right? They know how to like push our buttons. And I remember like saying to them, I'm mad because you did. And I would blame them. And it was like, you know what? I'm mad because I am letting myself overreact right now. Yes, what they did wasn't ideal, but I'm still responsible for how I choose. And I'm telling you, Michelle, this my response is my responsibility became this mantra in our home that changed all of our lives. And then I teach my kids, your response is your responsibility. So I love this so much about teaching us how to own our choices. And I think it's really not something that is in culture. I think a lot of times, we see it in Facebook and people just saying whatever they want to someone that's on the other end, and they're not owning their words, they're not owning their reactions. And so you say you have to retrain your brain to make calm our first goal. And I just love this so much. So tell me how you practically help kids do this. What are some of your practical tools to help them retrain their brain for calm?
So the first thing a lot of times we'll use is like a meter, and we'll help them begin to see on a scale of like 1 to 5, like if they're little, 1 to 5, and then beginning to help them see, okay, what do I start feeling like in my body when I start experiencing the emotion of anger, and how fast does that move? And we're all made so different. Some people, like, they can go from 1 to 5 in like 5 seconds, and then some people, like, it builds slow and they ignore and they ignore, and then the littlest thing will make them blow. And so, but also just letting them know, like, when my cheeks get pink, I'm getting mad. If my shoulders are tense, if my stomach is tightening up, whatever it is, helping us understand. Because I mean, I literally have had people in my office go, I am not mad, and just like, I mean, and I wish I could tell the mirror, I am just telling you what I think. And 97% of all communication is verbal. So that means everything else is nonverbal, with the way we our volume. our tone, our gestures, our facial expressions. You can say to a kid, that's good enough, and they can believe that, or you can say, sure, that's good enough. And that means something totally different. And so I think part of this is helping kids begin to become aware of sometimes even sometimes there can be a disconnect from how I feel on the inside and how I'm presenting on the outside even. And that can be because we're not aware of what we're feeling on the inside, or we don't want to own it. Or sometimes it can just be that we really don't understand because of sometimes we're made intensely. I think about gifted kids and kids who have ADHD that, their brains move faster, and their fuse is going to go faster. So that's where you've got to learn to figure that out, and then figure out, how can I shut it down the fastest? And when I talk to MOPS groups, mothers of preschoolers, I laugh all the time because I tell them that, like, we had a calm down step in my house with some tools in it that we used for kids, so I could teach my kids how to calm down. That's part of that retraining of the brain. But I spent far more time in mommy timeout because when my brain was firing, I needed to get away, because I learned when I was trained by John Gottman's material that when your heart rate goes above a certain level, the parts of your brain that you want working don't work anymore. Your amygdala just kicks in, and the amygdala is where fight, flight, freeze, and fawn are stored. And that's what's so hard. Some kids look like I just had a family dynamic recently we were talking about, and the parent thought the kid was being disrespectful because they didn't talk back when they were asked a question, but the kid was so flooded they couldn't speak in that moment. And so I think it's also understanding these differences on how we work, helping our bodies calm down so our brain will kick back in. And then sometimes it's retraining our brain because we have especially as I talk to women, we have such unrealistic expectations sometimes about what our lives and families and homes should look like. And definitely we can blame, we can see these filtered, polished scenarios. And I think, like, if you expect your child to never talk back to you, I just laugh when mine do, because I'm like, there they go. They're being teenagers. Their goal is to kind of test and figure things out. And so that's the thing, what you said, you own your response. Your response is your responsibility, because one kid can say, I'm not doing that. And one parent might blow their top and lose it completely. And another parent might just laugh and say, yeah, I've heard that before, but you are, here's what it's going to look like. Or you can choose not to and not leave the house until you do, like you can almost have a humorous response because we've done this dance. So that's where I think it is about ownership. It's also about learning that skill of not only self-regulation, but also the reason I went to my room is there's only so much I can take sometimes. And so sometimes, I have asked a child in the car to quit talking because I'm like, I can't take another word. I'm going to lose it, and I don't want to lose it on you. And usually what's underneath that, and I'm glad you decided to talk about sad and mad together, is sometimes we're going to look like we're mad, but there's a lot of sad going. Mad is a secondary emotion, and a lot of times there's sad underneath that. When I'm grieving, part of grief is anger. In the old formula of like denial, bargaining, anger, depression, acceptance. When you look at that formula, and I wish it went perfectly like that, but it doesn't. There's ways. And it looks like a big ball of yarn all raveled up in a mess. And so we can be feeling these feelings, and then something like we just can't take anymore. Like I talked about before, sometimes it's a little thing. It's your kid saying, well, I don't understand why that's a big deal, da 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 da. And then you're like ready to go, just shut up. And that I don't want to say that to my child, because themselves are like frustrated and trying to understand. But I sometimes have to say, you have to quit talking. I cannot respond well anymore to this in this small car, or one of us has to get out,
Yes.
And walk for a minute. I don't know, but
I totally relate. And I love that you've said this word self-regulation. And I did not know how to self-regulate. And I even think self-awareness comes before self-regulation.
Yes.
And self-awareness, I had none. And it's so sad. I look back and think, how did I not become self-aware till I was 38? But it took till I was 38 to start to have some awareness of, oh, I read a book and it would describe this person that overreacted. I'm like, that's me. But it was like, why am I like that? And so I had to kind of dive deeper in what's triggering me and go back to my child. And there's a lot of depth work. And you guys, it's worth it because then you learn so much about yourself. And that doesn't mean I never get triggered again and I never overreact again. But now I'm so much more aware and I can sense it coming. And I love that you said anger is a secondary emotion. I didn't realize that. And my counselor said underneath it is hurt, worry, disappointment. And I realized so many times that's what I was feeling. I was hurt or I was disappointed. And so my growth step was to stop jumping straight to anger and say, I'm feeling hurt right now by what you said. And it's making me want to jump to anger, but I'm not going to go there. I'm going to address the hurt. And it was a really hard thing, but I had to like find, I could feel my like blood pressure, right? And it was like, okay, we gotta let that stop and address the actual feeling. And one of the things she even said is what keeps happening right before, that's one of your triggers. And I realized no one was listening to me. I was talking and the kids are, and I grew up in a home with there's four girls. And I don't think I always was listened to. And so I realized there might be something there that was triggering, when they say it's when you're hysterical, it's historical, right? And so I realized there's some stuff that happened there. And again, that's not them not listening. I should not be reacting the way I did. So there's so much work that we can go into, but the self-awareness is the first step and it's so important because you're not going to be the same as someone else. I love that you said a kid can go from 1 to 5 in 5 seconds. Another kid, it could take them a lot longer. And that's just the way God wired us. So we have to learn about us, there's not this one blanket thing everyone. And then how do we regulate ourselves? And I love that you're helping kids with that meter. I wish someone had told me that when I'm a 1 to 5 in 5 seconds, Michelle. I'm one of those.
Well, I'll give you two other terms that you might want to think about. Your window of
Yes.
tolerance. And so there are some days when I don't do as much because I know my window of tolerance is not going to last if I put too many demands on myself. And I think our kids have windows of tolerance. Like we are being so gentle with our 15-year-old right now. She's in the middle of finals. Her window of tolerance looks different right now than it will tomorrow. Her window of tolerance will be totally different tomorrow than it is right now while she's facing algebra 2 and chemistry. And so I think it's so important that we think about what is my child's window of tolerance right now? What is my window of tolerance? There are battles that I won't take on in certain seasons that I might take on in the summer because we have bigger windows of way more bandwidth then. I also think we need to think about titration, which is a word we use when we're talking about trauma. And that is not allowing yourself to take on too much too fast because it will overwhelm you. And so that means for me, sometimes I'm the one who's not talking in the car and asking 6 questions because, like, I was so tempted to have a conversation this morning. She's trying to get in the right headset for finals. And I could have easily, it talks about, if we're going to talk about anger, there's scripture that talks about parents don't provoke your children to anger. I could have provoked the anger by kind of poking this very on edge bear who's getting ready to take a test, who's full of 15-year-old hormones and the stress of all that. And instead, the only thing I really said to her was gently, I said, I asked, is there anything I could do to make it easier for you today? I said, would you like to go out to lunch and celebrate after we're done? Because we're going to celebrate no matter what. Because I'm not going to celebrate what happened on the test. I'm going to celebrate that you prepared and you prepared. And that's all I ask of you. And I've seen you prepare. And that's as far as I'm concerned, whatever happens in that school today is irrelevant. Because what has already happened is what we've asked of you.
Yeah, and so good.
When we approach our kids in ways like that, aware of the intensity of their emotions in the moment, and we show the kind of, I think, like we look all the time at when somebody was upset in scripture, Jesus showed compassion. And here I go, I'm going to get emotional. Jesus showed compassion and he showed comfort in the midst of hard times. And I think sometimes we're so busy trying to make them good that we lose sight of how hard it is in that moment. And I want my kids to be strong. I want them to be resilient. But I am seeing what's going on in this country today with kids. The parents' biggest worry is their kid will have a mental health issue as they age. That's the number one worry right now, as we looked at the research recently on this. Um, Lots of kids are struggling, lots of parents are struggling. And I think the important thing is that our homes are a place where we can talk about struggling and how to struggle well. And some days struggling well means you don't do you stay in your pajamas. It doesn't, now
Mm.
you can't stay in your pajamas for a week or you're going to go towards clinical depression. But sometimes they need a day. I have nothing else on my well, I signed her up for one thing, but other than that, I have nothing else on my agenda for them for a while. And I don't want to totally skip a very important chapter in this book that's on joy, because you know why I put that in there? Because I could have just left the three difficult emotions when we designed this. But here's the thing, when life is good, we've got to put those deposits of the good emotions, the good neurochemicals, those celebratory moments and memories, even I'm anticipating a 20-year anniversary trip right now. We need all that in that same box. So when the hard comes, there's something there to get us through to the heart and give us hope of what
Mm.
will come again.
It's so good. I love this window of tolerance. I'm telling you, I think my counselor explained it a little different, but I love the term of that because she talked about like we have a zone. And if we just do our normal ebbs and flows, we stay in that zone. But, grief will shrink our zone. And the normal things you can handle, you can't handle when you're going through grief. And I'm sure you could attest to that, Michelle, as just lost your father. And I know when we were going through the divorce, our zone had shrunk. She said, hungry, tired,
Angry,
all
angry, halt, hungry,
halt.
tired. Yeah, yeah, halt. Yeah,
Yeah. Wait, so it's hungry, angry,
lonely, tired.
lonely, tired. All of those things are going to affect our zone and their window of tolerance. And like you said, things going on like finals, that adds more stress. Like think about when we have things going on that add stress. For some reason, I think a lot of parents don't always enter into that with their kids. It's like we expect something, like you said, our expectations maybe aren't lining up to reality. Like when they're going through these things, they need to have lots of grace and lots of compassion and enter into it with them. And then maybe there's something you need to talk to them about later, and that needs to happen, like you said, a week later, whatever, a couple days later. And so that window of tolerance is really big. And I think, again, just helping our kids see that there will be seasons in their life where they'll be able to handle more than they can handle at other seasons, and being aware, that self-awareness piece, helping our kids learn how to regulate them themselves. We're kind of entering into it at the beginning, teaching them, but then eventually the goal is we're not involved at all and they can manage these hard emotions and well as the joy, but the hard ones are the hard ones to manage, right? Let's be real. And the overwhelming ones, the fear, the worry, all that. And so I just love that you have given so many practical tools. I mean, we could go on and on. I love the one about counting backwards and breathing, and you have so many, because you know what, it's going to be different for every kid which one resonates with them. That's going to be their tool that helps them. And so I love that you didn't just give a couple, you gave a lot throughout the devotional. I really believe this book is going to change these kids' lives for forever, because they're going to enter into adulthood and they're going to have tools in their emotional tool belt on how to handle the hard things in life that happen. And what a gift. I did not have that. It took me a long time before I learned how to do that. And I wish I could go back in time, but now I realize I've helped my kids with that. Again, we still have lots to learn. That's why I'm excited to do this. I know it's meant for younger, but I'm just going to still read it with some, not every single page with my kids, but as much as I can, I'm going to give these tools to my kids because it's so important. But that window of tolerance is huge. And I love, again, it comes back to me, that word empathy. Like, are we entering into where our kids are at? Are they going through something hard? Well, that's not the time to say, go clean your room. It's like, you know what? They'll eventually get their room clean, but maybe that's not the day to like, you know, harpoon them on the fact that their laundry is still in the basket.
I think too, when we do that, and then we involve God in the process, we pray for them, we ask how we can pray for them. I mean, I think my daughter knew when I had my hand on her. I didn't pray out loud because I knew it would tip her, but I was praying for her. I was praying very specifically, God, help her remember what she learned. And God, if she finishes one and starts for the other, if there's something she missed, show it to her so she'll be more prepared. And
Mm.
because I didn't think to pray that yesterday. I think when we do that, we also become, it's a new term I've kind of been playing around with. We become like extension cords. You know how we talk about plugging into the power of God? Sometimes I think we as parents can be these extension cords that allow our kids to plug into God's power by being these vessels of God's compassion, of his comfort, of his of his grace, but also just reminding them that God is present with us in the midst of these times that are
Mm,
difficult, because more often than not, as we work with kids in our office, they are abandoning the faith because they feel like God has let them down.
mm,
And I think that's where we have to send a message that God is with us. He doesn't change our We may struggle just as hard with God with us as we would without him, but it's just better because we're not alone. And
yes.
learning that concept and knowing that he doesn't, because somewhere they got the idea, a lot of them, because I'm like with them every week, that this wouldn't have happened if God was really this good God. And I think
Mm,
that talking about emotions is a great time to address how God is at work, but this isn't heaven. And we are not
yeah.
going to experience God's perfect will here on earth because we're here on earth. And there is suffering that is allowed that we will not experience someday. And there's hope in that. Not to, we have to be careful with that these days, because then I had one kid say, well, then I'm going to take myself out and go to heaven now. And I'm like, oh, I would hate that, because then you wouldn't honor the life God gave you. And they were
Hmm.
like, what do you mean by that? And I'm like, God has given you life here for a reason and a purpose. And I think that's part of our, I love talking about that with this age group because they're trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
Um, and
And I
so
think,
and
oh,
they
go
can
ahead.
be, well, I was just going to say they can be extension cords to other kids in the midst of that too.
Yeah. And I think for me personally, my hardest times was what grew my faith the most. If I hadn't walked through those hard things, I don't think I'd have the compassion and empathy I have for others that are walking through grief. Again, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so until you've entered into that where you have had a loss, then you're like, oh, I get now how hard that is. Now, when someone else has a loss, you know how, again, you don't know how to perfectly always enter into their pain, but you know how to show compassion, that you know how to say this is hard, and you know it's hard because you've walked through it. And so I feel like for me, I tell my kids, we don't understand always the purpose for the hard things we went through, but God never wastes one tear, one of our hurtful things. God will use them. And it doesn't always mean it's the big thing like a podcast or a book or, but it could be just like you being that lifeline to another person that's walking that same storyline. Maybe your parents went through a divorce, and now you know someone else whose parents, for your friends' parents are going through a divorce, and you now know how to enter into that with them and just be there. Or like my friend who passed away, her daughter has lost a mom, and she has another friend that had lost a mom, and now they've and again, I don't always understand why we have to go through these hard things, but I do realize that God doesn't waste it. And as we learn how to process those emotions and face them in a healthy way and have them move through us, we can't ignore them. They have to be addressed. But then we can then help someone else. It's like a bridge, and we're on it, and we can turn around and help the next person walking across the bridge. And if that is the purpose of it, then that gives that pain purpose. And it doesn't mean it was easy, and the pain is still very real. And so maybe even just kids seeing that there could be purpose to their hard time. And like you said, if they checked out, they wouldn't be able to help that next person. And I don't know. It's just something I'm passionate. It's my book, Depth, growing through heartbreak to strength. It's about how those heartbreaks grew me and how God used it to embrace to my character development. I had to embrace, like, I have a chapter called Embrace the Chisel. I don't know what wants to be chiseled, but that's part of the self-awareness, that growing. And so I love that you encourage those kids to see the bigger picture sometimes. Sometimes we only see the small piece, and God's got a wider scope. And this book, Michelle, is going to be life changing. I love it. Speaking of books, the last question I want to ask is, what books have been life changing to you? Do you have other books on emotional literacy that you would recommend that have really spoken to you, or just any book? But I was just curious if there was something that helped you as you were, you're a counselor. What books would you recommend?
So I am a counselor, and anybody, my staff laugh. There's a stack usually this big running around me in several locations. So I would say when I think back to younger years, two books that were huge impacts for me and was Search for Significance. I was in college and I volunteered with Louis Giglio, and he taught a series called The Carrot or the Cross based on that book. And that really helped me get away. The world loves us by what we do, how we look, and who likes us, and what we own. And God loves us because he made us. He paid a great price for us, and we're part of his family. And learning the
Mm,
difference between those was really life giving to me. Boundaries was huge for me because I am that caregiver, helper person and people pleaser. And I really needed that. And I've been trained in person by John Townsend and Henry Cloud. And I'm so grateful for their work, just all of their work, Changes That Heal, Save People. Recently, I even talked about Andi Colber, who wrote Try Softer. And she has a new book out which has been hard for me to go through right now. And Andi just lost her dad as well. Her dad died in the midst of her book
Mm.
release, Strong Like Water. And I'm like chewing on Strong Like Water. And just slowly walking through that as I'm experiencing. And she talks a lot about titration and windows of tolerance and a lot of those same ideas. And like I said, I'm still working through that. And then this Saturday, I read this book. I was a Baylor English major, and it's by a previous Baylor English professor, and it was called On Getting Out of Bed. And I was
Mm.
so curious. It popped up on my Audible as just a recommendation. And then I kind of looked it up and I listened to a sample and I read a couple reviews and I literally listened to the whole book on Saturday. Now I don't listen to things at one time the speed, I will confess. But I love the way he talked about the difference between mental health, mental illness, but he also used these other words that we don't talk a lot about, mental suffering and mental affliction. And that's
Mm.
where we don't really need a diagnosis, but it's acknowledging the struggle. And I love the way he talked about honoring life and hope, but also he honored how hard it was sometimes.
Yeah. What was his name that wrote that book?
Alan Noble is his name. And I
Okay.
don't think he's super well known, but I may be trying to help him change that because I, it wasn't like talking to somebody like me who's kind of an expert. It felt more like what I do in the counseling office. It was like somebody who really cared sitting beside me as I did some days not feel like getting out of bed, but why it answered the question of why it's important to get out of bed. And
Yeah.
I think our kids, I just want to say this. I know a lot of people think young people shouldn't even have that as a question, but I think they do. And they really have it. I just started working with a kid and I'm just like, that kid should have been in somebody's office a long time ago, ideally, because they've been struggling to go to school since they were 8 and they're 16 now. They've had 8 years of struggling to go to school and they
Yeah.
need some tools. And that's why I wanted to write this book because not everybody's going to take their kid to a counselor. I don't think these need to be counseling tools anymore. I think these need to be life tools that we all practice. Our world moves fast and there's a lot of pressure. And I think we are going to have to learn to breathe well and breath prayers, breathing in God's love and out our worries may just become part of daily practice for humanity.
Mm. I love it. These are not counseling tools, these are life tools. These are so important. It is so important to know how to manage your hard emotions and to manage all emotions, but especially the hard ones where a lot of people get hung up and they don't know how to do it. And so, this book that you guys wrote is such a beautiful tool. I cannot wait. I cannot wait for it to enter the world and help so many families. Michelle, I know Lynn wasn't here, but I'm giving a shout out to Lynn too. You both just killed it. The book is phenomenal. And thank you so much for your pearls of wisdom. We could talk all day, Michelle. We might have to have you back for a part 2 because you have some really wise things that really wise. Let me say again, you have a lot of wisdom, and I could talk to you all day. So, thank
So
you.
sweet. We'll give you a book to give away to a listener when this comes out. So we'll give you,
Perfect.
yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. I love that. You know, I love to give books away. That's my love language. So, thank you so much. And thanks again for coming on today. And oh my goodness, I learned so much.